Good day, brothers and sisters, comrades all. My name is David Comissiong, and I am Barbados's ambassador to the Caribbean community and also to the Association of Caribbean States. And it's a real pleasure to be participating in this 6th International Congress of African, American, and Caribbean Knowledge within the framework of the Venezuelan International Book Fair. The topic that I have been given to address is the trend of the Republican movements in the Caribbean, the Barbados experience. As many of you may know, Barbados became a republic on the 30th of November last year, when we got rid of the British monarchy as our head of state and elected one of our very own citizens to that high exalted office. It has been a long journey for Barbados. We trace the foundation of the Barbadian nation back to 1625, when English settlers landed in Barbados, took control of the island, which back then was actually called Ichiruganim by the legitimate indigenous owners of the island. Of course, by 1625, Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors had depopulated the island of its indigenous people. The Spanish came, they raided the indigenous people, they enslaved them, and they took them away from Barbados to slave in other Spanish colonies in the Caribbean. So from 1625, 1627, when the permanent British settlement was put down, Barbados was a British colony, and Barbados remained a British colony throughout all of the years, up until when we became independent in the year 1966. In fact, Barbados was Britain's mother colony in the Caribbean. Barbados used to be known as Little England. And Barbados suffered the fate of being the world's first out-and-out slave society. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm not saying that Barbados was the first society that had slavery as a feature of the society, but Barbados was the first society that was founded completely on the basis of slavery. A great majority of the Barbadian people, the Barbadian population, was enslaved Africans. Indeed, by the 1660s, that British colony had developed a sugar plantation system in which the laboring class was enslaved Africans, African people that the European enslavers brought across the Atlantic from the west coast of Africa to work on the plantations of Barbados. So everything about Barbados, its economy, its social system, its governing ideology, everything was based on slavery. The world's first out-and-out slave society. And so the masses of the Barbadian people had to fight from that low point of their existence as enslaved human beings. And you know, when we think of independence, we think of the concept of sovereignty. We think of the concept of sovereignty as the power of a people to do everything necessary to govern themselves. Well, the black masses of Barbados had to engage in a tremendous fight to gain sovereignty for themselves, to overthrow the system of slavery, to then gain civil rights for themselves. And the colony of Barbados itself had to fight against the British colonial power to attain its sovereignty and ultimately its national independence. So if we trace the struggle of the Barbadian people for freedom and sovereignty and self-determination, we have to look at the slave rebellions. The Barbadian people rebelled. Quite often, the major slave plots were sold out. They did not come to fruition, but we see this trend of rebellion against enslavement from as early as 1649, the first uprising of the enslaved in Barbados. 1675, major slave conspiracy. 1683, 1686, 1692, 1701, all of them major slave conspiracies, sold out, many people, many rebels executed, severe punishment, brutalization of the population. And then finally, in 1816, a major slave rebellion. It is known as the Bussa Slave Rebellion, and it played a very important role in helping to bring down the system of British slavery. So the Bussa Rebellion, 1816, followed by, in 1821, Demerara Rebellion. In the early 1830s, another major rebellion in Jamaica, until finally, in 1833, the British Parliament passes the act that abolishes slavery in the British Empire in 1834. After that, our people go on a journey of fighting for civil rights, fighting for the right to vote, the right to be represented in Parliament, etc., etc., fighting to take control of the instruments of local government in Barbados, and to use those instruments to uplift this degraded slave-based population. And so the story of Barbados really is about an incremental struggle to take more and more rights, to take more and more control of sovereignty. That is the power to do everything necessary to govern ourselves. Until by 1966, we now have Black political parties, Black trade unions, the masses of the people, mass political parties, mass labor organizations. And on the basis of that mass political power, we are able to demand independence of Britain and to become independent on the 30th of November, 1966. And we give a lot of credit for that achievement to the man that we call the father of our independence, the Right Excellent Prime Minister Errol Walton Barrow. So we achieved national independence in 1966. We were indeed the fourth of the English-speaking colonies of the Caribbean or the West Indies to achieve national independence. The first one was Jamaica in 1962. Jamaica was followed by Trinidad and Tobago also in 1962, followed by Guyana in 1966, and then Barbados in November of 1966. However, that independence in 1966 was not a full and complete independence. It was, we could call it a substantive independence because there were two compromises. We made two compromises on our sovereignty. We became independent, but in 1966 we said look, although we are independent, we will permit the British Privy Council, this is a very elevated British court, we will permit the British Privy Council in London to remain our highest national court. So clearly, that was a compromise on sovereignty. It meant that we had left some of the power to govern ourselves in the hands of our British colonial masters. Secondly, the second compromise, we said, although we are independent, we will permit the British monarchy to remain our head of state. Largely symbolic head of state, largely ceremonial, but still with a few substantial powers. Granted, we established a local Barbadian Governor General, who was the British monarch's representative on the ground in Barbados, and it was that local Governor General that carried out the functions of the head of state, but it was still a compromise on our sovereignty. We had still left some of the power to govern ourselves in the hands of this foreign British monarchy. By 2005, we had corrected the compromise that had to do with our court system. By 2005, we got rid of the British Privy Council, we established the Caribbean Court of Justice, and we made the Caribbean Court of Justice our highest national court. And then last year, we finally took full control of our sovereignty and of our national independence when we got rid of the British monarchy out of our constitutional arrangements, and we replaced the British monarchy with a Barbadian president elected by the members of the Parliament of Barbados. So we became a republic in the sense that we took full control of the power to do everything to govern ourselves. We nationalized that power, localized it in Barbados, but we also got rid of the notion of monarchy or aristocracy. So we recommitted ourselves to the democratic ideal that anyone who holds official governmental power in Barbados could only do so through the will of the people, not because you belong to some so-called special family, some so-called royal family. So we are now about to celebrate the first anniversary of our existence as a republic. I'm pleased to say that of all the British colonies in the Caribbean, Barbados is not the only one that not only became independent, but also went on to republican status. In fact, the honor of being the first British colony that went on to republican status, that honor lies with Guyana. Guyana became a republic in 1970. Trinidad followed suit in 1976. Then came Dominica in 1978. Dominica was unique because when Dominica took hold of its independence in 1978, it also became a republic. In the case of Trinidad, Guyana, and Barbados, we went into independence first and then worked our way towards becoming a republic some years after. So Barbados is the fourth of the former British colonies in the Caribbean to become a republic. However, there are still 8 independent English-speaking nations in the Caribbean that are still holding on to the British monarchy as their head of state. And I refer to Jamaica, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, and the Bahamas. In addition, we still have a number of British colonies in the Caribbean: Montserrat, Anguilla, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, the Turks and Caicos Islands, and Bermuda in the North Atlantic. But we think of Bermuda as being a Caribbean country because it's so similar to us culturally. So there's still a lot of work to be done in our Caribbean region. First of all, to rid our region of European colonies, and in our case, British colonies. But then the 8 independent Caribbean countries, English-speaking Caribbean countries, that are still holding on to the British monarchy as their head of state, that too is unfinished business that we need to attend to. The good news is that when Barbados, formerly Little England, became a republic, it seems to have inspired several of our fellow independent Caribbean nations to do likewise. And so since November of 2021, we have heard statements coming out of the governmental authorities in Jamaica, in Antigua, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and in Belize, indicating that they too, perhaps inspired by Barbados, motivated by Barbados, are going to try to follow suit. We also heard a statement coming out of the government of St. Lucia that they are going to break away from the British Privy Council. Many of our independent Caribbean countries still hold on to the British Privy Council. Many of them have not done like what Barbados did in 2005. Guyana has broken away, Dominica has broken away, Belize has broken away, but many of the others still hold on to the British Privy Council as their highest national court. So there's unfinished business to be done. All of our countries need to break away from the British Privy Council and accept our Caribbean Court of Justice as our highest national court, and also to break away from the British monarchy. So that is a mission that we are going to have to work on very seriously in our region. The other intriguing aspect of this topic would be to have a look at Barbados's record over the past 12 months since becoming a republic. I am of the opinion that Barbados really needed to become a republic because our country has the ambition to make a mark in international affairs, to be a pioneer, to move out of the colonial type relationships that we were placed in for hundreds of years, and to break new ground. And how can you break that new ground credibly if when other countries look at you, they see the monarch of Britain hovering over you as your highest secular official? So it was very important in Barbados's own self-interest, and in order to facilitate the new role that we want to play in Caribbean affairs, in international affairs, it was very important that we get rid of that hindrance of having a British monarch as our head of state. And you can see that the psychological boost that we got from relieving ourselves of this foreign European head of state, that psychological boost has manifested itself in some very powerful initiatives. In fact, and let me itemize some of these initiatives. I was very proud in November of last year when we became a republic. Almost simultaneous with becoming a republic, we officially opened in Bridgetown, Barbados, our very own Freedom Park, our Golden Square Freedom Park. This is a beautiful 2-acre facility in the heart of the city of Bridgetown that celebrates our revolutionary heritage, our working class heritage, our labor movement heritage. And it seemed to me that by investing in developing this powerful and beautiful Golden Square Freedom Park, sacred ground in Barbados that celebrates the best of our revolutionary tradition, that we were sending a message to ourselves that this was a new Barbados. This was a Barbados that was going to seek its identity in its revolutionary history and heritage. So for me, we started on a very sound psychological foundation. And we have said, look, the Republic of Barbados, one of the first things we are going to do, we are going to honor our heritage. We are going to honor our struggle against, our people's struggle against enslavement. We have the good fortune to have perhaps the most complete slave burial ground in the entire hemisphere, the Newton Slave Burial Ground. It has 570 graves of enslaved people still intact. And the new Republic of Barbados is going to commemorate that history and dignify it. And so we have determined that we are going to develop a world-class slavery memorial, but we are also going to take our 12 million. We have perhaps outside of Britain, we have perhaps the greatest archive of slavery-based documents in the entire English-speaking world. Some 12 million documents that document that whole history of enslavement. And of course, Barbados, as I said, was Britain's mother colony in the Caribbean. So one of the first projects we have determined for the Republic of Barbados is a heritage industry that is going to be centered around a slavery museum, slavery memorial, digitization of those slavery-based documents, that whole archive, making them available for scholars, etc. So that has to do with how we see ourselves, how we reappraise our history, how we reappraise our sense of personal and national identity. We have also said that the new Republic of Barbados has to be concerned about social transformation. And one of the most powerful ideas that the Republican government has put forward is that we are going to develop a renewable energy industry, and we are determined that it must not be an industry that falls into the hands of the elite. It must be an industry that is subject to democratic ownership, and we are going to use that renewable energy industry to drive social transformation in Barbados. So for example, we have created a new housing development program known as the Home Ownership Providing Energy Program. And this is where it's a government program, but this is where the government makes the land available to working class, lower middle class Barbadians basically free, but free in the sense that the would-be homeowner agrees to permit the state to put a photovoltaic system on the roof of the house that is to be constructed, to sell the energy generated from the photovoltaic system to the national grid, and to use that money to finance payment for the land. So the would-be homeowner does not have to look for money to finance payment of the land. He or she only has to worry about looking for the finance to construct the home. After 20 years, that photovoltaic system will come to the ownership of the homeowner, and that homeowner will have an additional source of income. We are also applying this concept of using the renewable energy industry, using photovoltaic systems, putting them on the roofs of small homeowners to give small homeowners a second source, an additional source of income. The energy generated by these systems will be sold to the national grid. So the whole idea is that this new industry, this renewable energy industry that is based on the sun, which is the natural heritage of all of our people, that industry must not fall into the hands of any capitalist class or any elite, but must be owned by the people and used to drive social transformation. Over the past 12 months, the new Republican government of Barbados has been very much in the vanguard in pushing the notion of production integration within the Caribbean community. Coming out of the COVID pandemic and all of the supply chain difficulties we had during the COVID pandemic, we have determined that we are going to grow more of our own food within the Caribbean community. And so Barbados, the Barbadian government, has joined forces with the governments of Guyana and Suriname on an agricultural production program, a food security program, where we are going to be collaborating. We are going to be using the vast land space of Guyana and Suriname. We are building in Barbados a 7-acre food terminal of warehouses, refrigeration facilities, and Barbados will become a hub for fresh produce produced primarily in those South American countries of Guyana and Suriname. Barbados will become the hub for re-export. Also, Barbadian farmers will have access to the land space of Suriname and Guyana, because as you know, Barbados is a small island with very limited land space. So again, I think this is reflective of a new Republican ethos of self-reliance, of self-determination. And then in our external policy, over the past 12 months, we have had a number of diplomatic initiatives. For example, Barbados right now, the Republic of Barbados, is actively reaching out to the African continent. We have established new Barbadian embassies in Ghana and in Kenya. And just last week, we established a new Barbadian consulate in Rwanda. So this is another aspect of a new Republican foreign policy where we are very clear. Traditionally, as a British colony and as an independent country still under that British monarchy, we have tended to pursue international relations with the English-speaking, Europe, Britain, North America, the United States, Canada, But we are very clear now that for us, the continent of Africa is going to be a priority. And so not only have we established the embassies, but in September of this year, between the 1st and 3rd of September, the Barbados government joined forces with the African Export and Import Bank to stage in Barbados the first Africa Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum. There were 1,200 delegates at that Trade and Investment Forum, people coming from 41 different African countries. And out of that forum, we are going to be following up. We are going to establish a Caribbean Export-Import Bank to do trade with the African continent. We are working on the direct airline linkage between Africa and the Caribbean. We are institutionalizing the Trade and Investment Forum. The next forum will be on the continent of Africa in the year 2023. We have established an Africa Caribbean Business Council. And so again, this is a new dimension to the foreign and trade and economic policy of the Republic of Barbados. And perhaps by far the most ambitious initiative is the Bridgetown Initiative. Between the end of July going into early August this year, our government invited to Barbados a number of outstanding scholars and intellectuals and activists with deep insights into the international economic and political order, deep insights into many of the existential challenges facing the world today. And we brainstorm. What are the reforms required? What is the new international economic and political order that the world needs? And we came up with a blueprint. And that blueprint is called the Bridgetown Initiative. And the world first heard about it at the recent United Nations General Assembly in September of this year. The world heard about it from our Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley. And this is going to become the flagship foreign policy initiative of the Republic of Barbados. And it's a plan that is calling for a fundamental revamping of the international order and the major financial institutions of the international order. So we're asking the question, we are saying, look, these Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank group of institutions, they were established in 1945 when most of our countries were still colonies. You know, the whole of the Caribbean was colonized back then. All of Africa was colonized. Virtually all of Asia was colonized. So these institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, were basically established in a way to privilege the independent nations of Europe, Western Europe, and North America. And so we are calling for a revamping of these institutions to bring them into the 21st century. We are saying that in terms of power and influence within these institutions, voting rights within these institutions, they need to be revamped to make room for Black and brown nations and peoples. And also their functions and their policies. We are saying that their functions and policies now need to cater more. Back then, when they were established, there were only 51 independent nations in the world. Now there are 195 independent nations in the world. Most of them developing countries with very serious developmental needs. So we are saying that they need to be, their functions and the scale at which they perform their functions need to be very seriously revamped. So our Bridgetown initiative, it basically has three major components. The first component is focused on the debt crisis that is facing so many developing countries coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, 1 in 4 countries in the world, 1 in 4 developing countries is under serious financial and debt stress. And so the Bridgetown initiative begins by some very practical policies to come to the immediate assistance of developing countries facing a debt crisis, including the reallocation of 100 billion in IMF special drawing rights, unused IMF special drawing rights that have been allocated to wealthy countries that don't need them. We are saying reallocate them to developing countries that are under serious debt stress. We are also saying the IMF needs to go back to unconditional easy credit for developing countries under debt stress. And we are saying suspend. We need another temporary suspension of interest surcharges. We need the multilateral development banks to suspend payments on debts that developing countries had to take on to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. Then step two is saying beyond just the immediate debt crisis, these international financial institutions need to be upgraded to provide the kind of finance that developing countries need if we are to attain the sustainable development goals, if we are to achieve the sustainable development goals. So we are making a case that new credit in the order of $1 trillion needs to be made available to governments right across the world to assist them with finance to meet the sustainable development goals at concessional rates. And also, we are also insisting that loans to achieve development, loans to achieve the sustainable development goals must be long-term loans. There must be at least 30-year loans. And our Prime Minister has pointed out that, European countries, when they have been faced with difficult financial situations, they have been permitted to extend their debt liability over multiple decades. For example, Britain was permitted to pay off the debt it accumulated in World War I. It was permitted to pay off that debt over a period of 100 years. Similarly, Germany, after the Second World War, when Germany was faced with rebuilding from the calamity of that war, concessions were made to Germany. Germany was only required to spend something like 5% of its export earnings in making payments on its debt. So we are saying, the Bridgetown Initiative is saying, vastly increase concessional financing for developmental projects for developing countries, and it must be long-term money, at least 30-year money. Then the third step of the Bridgetown Initiative focuses on the climate crisis. And the Bridgetown Initiative is calling for the establishment of a global climate mitigation trust that should be funded, initially capitalized at the level of 500 billion IMF special drawing rights, the equivalent of 650 billion US dollars. And that initial fund should then be leveraged to bring on board private sector savings and investment all across the world. It must be leveraged up to trillions of dollars to finance climate mitigation projects all over the world. Climate mitigation projects that will be at the massive scale required to keep the global temperature rise to within 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. The 1.5 degrees that we need to restrict the temperature rise to, if humanity is to be spared the worst of the climate crisis. And we are also saying, that this global climate mitigation trust, but we're also saying that developing countries that are not responsible for these greenhouse gases historically, that did not really contribute to the climate crisis, but are now the main victims of the climate crisis, there needs to be compensation for loss and damage. When a Caribbean country, for example, is hit by a ferocious hurricane and is devastated, that country should not have to go borrowing money to rebuild. That there must be a loss and damage fund that that country should be given reconstruction grants to rebuild its infrastructure. And we are saying, the Bridgetown Initiative is saying, the way to establish that global loss and damage fund is to impose a tax on these multinational oil and gas corporations like Chevron, ExxonMobil, British Petroleum, Shell, Total, these massive multinational companies that are making enormous profits. We say tax them at the level of 10% of their profits. Let those funds go into a global loss and damage fund that can provide reconstruction grants to developing countries suffering from severe climate impacts. So those are some of the new initiatives of the Republic of Barbados over the past year. Perhaps the last one I would like to mention is an event that is upcoming. It will take place in Barbados on the 6th of December of this year, and I'm referring to the CARICOM Cuba Heads of Government Summit. This year, 2022, the Caribbean community is going to be celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations between CARICOM and Cuba. It's also 50 years of Barbados's establishment of diplomatic relations with Cuba. And Barbados specifically requested CARICOM to permit Barbados to be the host of the CARICOM Cuba Heads of Government commemorative summit. And we did that because we prize that relationship with Cuba. We are hoping that coming out of that summit, we can come up with some new initiatives in our ongoing struggle to remove that US blockade of our sister Caribbean country of Cuba. This is something that concerns us very, very, very deeply. This notion of the unilateral imposition of coercive measures, we denounce it. We denounce it in the case of Cuba. We also denounce it in the case of Venezuela. And we are going to continue. We are going to continue to express that solidarity with Cuba, but also with Venezuela. Barbados is very proud that we were able to join forces with Norway a couple of years ago to help play a good officer's role when with Venezuela, when Venezuela was in a time of need. You know, the conflict between the government forces in Venezuela and the posturing, those posturing opposition forces under Juan Guaido, who claimed that he was some provisional president of Venezuela. Barbados was able to offer a space to help in dialogue around that entire process. And we remain committed in our solidarity. As I said, we remain opposed to this notion that powerful countries, without any authorization from the United Nations or the United Nations Security Council, should feel that they can simply unilaterally impose crippling, coercive measures, sanctions on other sovereign countries across the globe. So I think I've said enough to give you an idea of the kind of domestic, regional, and foreign policy that the new Republic of Barbados is pursuing and is going to pursue even more strongly and avidly in the years to come. And it is our hope, that that unfinished mission of decolonizing our Caribbean region, totally decolonizing it. First of all, getting rid of the remaining European colonies, but even going a step further, not simply being content with becoming independent countries, but taking all of us to the stage of being proud, sovereign, independent republics in which national sovereignty, all of the power to do everything necessary to govern ourselves, is in our own Caribbean hands. So stay tuned. I think you will in the months and years to come, you will see a lot more from the Republic of Barbados that is going to please you. That is my prediction. Thank you very much.